Hello, my name is Linda Abraham, and I am the president of Accepted and the moderator for today's webinar. I want to welcome all of you to How to Get into Medical School with Low Stats, to be presented by Alicia McNeese-Nemankar. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. Alicia is going to ask a few questions during the presentation and ask you to raise your hand in response. You can do so by clicking on the hand icon, two icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. Please raise your hand, and that means clicking on that icon when you find it. Let's see how you folks doing. Finding it? Please click on that icon. Okay, great. Oh, we have a wonderful audience today. They found the icon, they're raising their hands. Okay, thank you very much. A few more points. Raising hands allows you to respond to our questions. What about your questions? We have a lot of time during and at the end of the presentation for questions, and Alicia will answer them then. If you have a general question and we run out of time before answering it today, you can post it on accepted.com/medschool2018. A few more points. We use the question window for your questions, but we also use it for you to answer our questions. So if Alicia asks an open-ended question, please post your response in the question window. Also, when you will receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback, and we use it to improve these webinars and hopefully provide content that's of value to you. We'll announce a special discount for attendees today at the end of the webinar, so stay tuned and don't leave before it's over. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Alicia McNeese-Nemankar, who will present how to get accepted to medical school with low stats today. Alicia started advising accepted clients in 2012. She immediately was earning rave reviews from clients. Prior to joining Accepted, she both evaluated applications and advised med school applicants as director of the UC Davis Postbac program. She brings enormous insight and experience with the medical school application process to our webinar today. Without further ado, Alicia McNeese-Nemankar and how to get into medical school with low stats.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. So to customize the webinar to you, we like to start by asking how many people are planning on applying to medical school this cycle. If you could give us a show of hands.
Okay, got a pretty good group, about 37%. Anybody else planning to apply? I'm actually surprised I guess they're planning ahead. Okay.
That's nice, excellent. The next activity we're going to do is a poll. So which of your scores, GPA or MCAT, gave you the most concern or worry? So if you could participate in the poll, this allows us to customize the webinar to you. So MCAT, GPA, or both?
All right, we have about 65% having voted. Can we get that number up? Which best describes you? Are you concerned primarily about the MCAT, your GPA, or both? We're at 72% having voted. Let's see if we can't get that up to 80%. 5, 4, 3, 2, almost there. Come on, anybody else want to vote? All right, we did it. With 81% having voted, here are the results. So 90% are most concerned about the MCAT, 46% are most concerned about the GPA, and 34% are concerned about both.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for participating in that poll. That helps me figure out exactly what we should focus on today. So moving on, the reason in my experience that applying with low scores can hurt students is that the MCAT in the past has been used to assess a student's ability to pass the USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 later in medical school. So these are standardized tests that allow you to move on through each phase of your medical education. So the MCAT is one form of a standardized test that helps them predict how well you do on these types of standardized exams. The GPA is a less predictable indicator of academic ability, and this is because every campus has so much variability in how challenging their coursework may be, but it's still used to determine how strong a student's commitment is to completing their long-term academic goals. So since most of you, 46%, are most concerned about your GPA, hopefully this will bring you a little relief in knowing that, right, it's not just the GPA that they look at. So it's a combination. So the MCAT definitely, but they also look at your essays, your activities, and if you're applying as a disadvantaged applicant, right, they look at that as well. So it's not just the GPA that they focus on. So don't be discouraged also if you review the MSAR. So the MSAR is the Medical School Admissions Requirements Handbook, and it's now electronic on the AAMC website. So it includes all the data for each school. If you don't yet have an MSAR account, I highly recommend getting one because you're able to see, right, the breakdown of ethnicities of students they accept, the breakdown of gender, the percent of students they accept from out of state, in state, the average MCAT scores, average GPA accepted. It provides a lot of useful information when you're ready to decide which schools you want to apply to. And it can help to begin looking at these numbers early so that, right, you'll have a good idea of which schools in which you fit in their ranges. So the good news about the MSAR is that they only share the average scores. So they do not show the full range of MCAT and GPA scores that they accept, right? So the MSAR is more of a competition between schools. So it's basically about Harvard not wanting to admit that they accept a lower GPA than Yale. So those numbers are fierce and they can seem intimidating. They are self-reported by the schools. So keep in mind, right, it is about reputation and competition among the schools. So they don't show the full range of scores. But those averages can be useful to make sure that you fit in at least one before you decide to apply to a school. And we'll discuss that in more detail. So when applying with lower scores, it is especially important to focus on the following sections of your application to make them as strong as possible. So the personal statement, the activity section essays, and of course the statement of disadvantage if that applies to you. So to decide where to focus your energy, it's important to accurately self-reflect to determine the best approach to addressing any weaknesses in your application, right? So first you have to identify where those weaknesses are. So the first place to start is to evaluate your application. So determine your location. So if your MCAT score is lower, right, you're going to need to improve your GPA. If your GPA is higher, right, you're going to be able to have a lower MCAT score. So it's really important, right, to keep in mind to evaluate, okay, if your GPA is strong, then you don't have to have a perfect MCAT score. So self-reflection is the next step. So accurately assessing your strengths and weaknesses. And this is not to encourage you to be hard on yourself, but really just for you to know, where are your strengths? Do you have amazing activities? Do you have years of service working with medically underserved communities? Do you have impressive leadership experiences? Have you created a nonprofit organization? Right? All of these things matter. So assess your strengths as well as your weaknesses. So once you have that information, you can come up with a strategy. Right? So you must have a destination or you will never reach a specific location. Right? It can be like being lost in a labyrinth in applying to medical school. So once you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, you can create a strategy. So figuring out where you are in terms of, okay, my GPA is competitive, but maybe my MCAT's not, right? Then you can come up with a strategy to target that situation. So let's start with the most difficult section, the personal statement. So for those of you listening, why is this section so hard?
Okay, in the question window, anybody want to take a stab at why is a personal statement difficult to write? Alexander responds that you have to pick one topic. That can be difficult if you have a lot of different interests. So many experiences, requires deep introspection, says Pedro. You don't know where to begin, says Jermel, narrowing down what to write about. That seems to be a theme. It's hard not to repeat everything in the activities and experiences, says Kathleen. Mata is concerned that not good enough experiences compared to others. Because you need to explain briefly why you want to explore medicine when I can ramble on forever. Trying to tell a story in such a short amount of space. Ryan says you're trying to sell yourself without sounding cocky. Camille adds that it's very subjective. Katie, don't know what to share and how much to share. Shlomo, it's really hard to sound real. Malik, it defines who you are, the first thing med schools see about you. Boy, you're getting a lot of responses here. How to make it engaging, says Devia. Trying to create a storyline of why you want to be a med student, Sukhmeet. I apologize if I mispronounce anybody's name. It's hard to write about yourself. This is from Beverly. Rachel says you have to be unique and stand out. And Pedro says explaining and showing that you have a passion is difficult to put in words. Andrew
These
says,
are excellent.
Yeah, they are excellent. Creating a unique story that they haven't seen before.
Yeah, these are excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with a few of the first couple ones. So picking one topic. So I like that somebody mentioned coming up with a theme, because often, right, you don't want to pick one topic, but essentially you want to identify a theme, right, that can lead to a thread that carries throughout your personal statement. And I think often, if you sit down and create a timeline of your life, coming up with an artistic or fun way of looking at your experiences from a different perspective can be very helpful. So something like creating a timeline where you're just for fun listing every possible thing you can think of that has led to your love of science or teamwork or communication or leadership. You know, all these things relate to medicine, can help you identify those themes in your life, so that, you know, it's easier to pick a topic or a place to start with the intro. Deep introspection, I agree. It can be challenging to spend the time, right? It takes time to engage in that level of introspection. And that's why the fact that so many of you are starting early by participating in this webinar today is so wonderful. Or you're all giving yourself the time to begin thinking about how you're going to approach the personal statement. And that's a lot of the success. So not knowing where to begin. And I think, you know, for the person who said not knowing where to begin, if you start with a timeline, that can often be a very effective place to begin. And journaling can be helpful, reviewing old journals or notebooks, or old, you know, photo books if you have, of trips that you've done, or volunteer events or activities. Somebody else mentioned that it's difficult not to repeat everything. And that is a very good point to make, is that the activities section allows you to provide a summary of all of your activities. So it wouldn't be helpful to replicate that in the personal statement. So I agree, it's not a good idea to repeat everything in the personal statement. So identifying your themes, right, often through a timeline or journaling, can really help you come up with a focus that's true to you. Somebody mentioned comparing experiences to others. That's actually one of the fastest ways to make yourself feel bad, is to compare yourself or your experiences to other people. So I don't recommend comparing yourself to others, because you are already a unique individual. It's just a matter of you identifying which unique combination of themes, right, relate to you. So it's taking the time for introspection to explain, as somebody said, explain and show why medicine is the only career for you. So these are fantastic comments. So yeah, the personal statement's hard because it takes time. It's difficult to know what to include, right, when especially when addressing any weaknesses in your application, which is appropriate to do here. And the best advice I can give you is to strive to create a balance of personal as well as professional information that provides context for for your struggles in your GPA, as well as with your GPA and MCAT score. So for those of you listening, why would this balance be important to maintain between professional and personal information?
In the question window, anybody want to take a stab at it? Why is it important to maintain a balance between professional and personal in the personal statement? Whitney says it's what physicians have to deal with. Being a physician is all about work-life balance, suggests Andy. Anybody else? Anybody else want to take a stab at that one? Let's see, Pedro. You need to show that you are a competent professional and that you have a passion for it. Alexandria says you don't want to share too much, but still give admissions members the idea that you can be professional. Ryan says because we are trying to show them who we are and why we would fit into their institution. And I think Madonna hits the nail on the head, to show professionalism and some humanity and uniqueness. And then Nikia adds, because in the field there needs to be a balance of being personal as well as professional. I think these are again, we have a great audience today. We're getting great answers.
Yay, yeah, these are fantastic. Yeah, so work-life balance is incredibly important, and as a physician, right, that's constantly a challenge to make sure that you carve out enough time for your personal life. So demonstrating, right, that you are participating in sports, or you have artistic interests, or you play a musical instrument, right, all of this demonstrates how you create balance in your life and how, right, you'll maintain that balance in medical school. I definitely agree with the person who mentioned to demonstrate you're a competent professional with passion. And the interesting thing, and I recently worked with a student who was a portrait photographer, and he became an otolaryngology surgeon. And it was so interesting how his love of taking portraits of people, right, led to this career in doing cleft palate surgeries, or surgeries where he was correcting issues that people were having from birth. But his love of looking at faces, and he traveled the world doing these portraits, really led to him becoming a better head and neck surgeon. So while you might think your talents or your activities outside of school might not be relevant to medicine, it's all relevant. It's all relevant. Somebody mentioned not sharing too much. Absolutely, that can be a huge problem. Showing professionalism, yes, absolutely. So the best example that I could probably give you of a personal statement where someone was too personal would be one in which a student wrote about a family member committing suicide and what it was like to struggle with that family member's condition. And a lot of that students' writing was about the family member. They didn't write about themselves so much, but it became a little too much detail and a little too much information about the dynamics of their family. So it was way too personal, and it read more like a medical history than a personal statement. And it raised red flags, in a number of ways. The other type of personal statement on the other end of the spectrum is somebody being too professional. So the best example I have of this is a student who wrote about how much she loved to work with dead people. She wrote about working for a medical pathologist, doing autopsies, and how much she enjoyed, participating in those autopsies. And it was far too professional, right? She definitely demonstrated her love of anatomy, knowledge of the human body, but it made you squirm, right? It made you very uncomfortable to read the essay because it sounded more like a mad science-y kind of thing. So you don't want to be too personal, you don't want to make people squirm or uncomfortable, and you don't want to be too professional because you could be robotic or sound like a mad scientist. So what are some ways that you all plan to approach this task successfully, since it is such a delicate balancing acts.
Okay. Anybody want to respond to Alicia's question? What are some ways that things could be too personal? So, Sukhmeet asks, so should talking about any mental health issues in the past, such as depression, be not talked about in our personal statement?
Oh, that's such a good question.
And Vincent suggests saying intimate family details. Marriage and divorce. I would also add, romantic struggle, breakups. And then somebody else asks a very good question. Can't your struggle, which motivates you, be talked about in your personal statement? I think anyway, Alicia, you want to address some of this?
Yeah, these are so fantastic. So that's such a great question about the mental health issues. So it really depends on the specific situation. In the example that I gave, the student was still processing the loss of a family member, and they clearly, weren't sure yet how they were going to deal with it. If, for example, somebody did have a loss like that in their family, but they became an educator or became active with organizations that educated the community about mental health or depression, or became an advocate for those who struggle with mental health issues, or somehow became involved in a leadership or community service role on that topic, then in that case, that would be a way to share the struggle, but in a way that demonstrates how you handle struggle, right? That because it perhaps has touched your family personally, how you have decided to use that to empower yourself and others through education or leadership. So it all depends on the specific situation, but it is possible to be too intimate in providing family details. For example, a client recently wanted to write about his mom having an ovarian cancer and her going through the process of surgery and having it removed. But again, unless there was something that student actively did to assist or to help or became involved perhaps in educating people about finding these kinds of cancers, it's really just passive observation, and it comes across as providing a medical history. And since your audience is made up of doctors and medical professionals, you don't want your personal statement to sound like a medical history. You want it to sound like a very beautiful explanation of all the reasons why you want to go into medicine. So I think the danger of providing too many intimate family details is that it can read like a medical history. Somebody asked about talking about marriage or divorce, and I think again, that it depends on the situation, of course, and the details. But if, for example, your parents divorced when you were very young and you grew up in a single-parent household, and if your family struggled, to cover basic expenses because it was a single-parent household, it would absolutely be appropriate to mention the divorce, because if it has an impact on your access to meeting your basic needs or basic resources, yes, that would be important to mention. If you're thinking of writing about your own marriage or divorce, again, it would depend on the details. But it's something that I would probably discourage in general, unless there was a specific reason that you were sharing that would explain how it relates to why you're applying to medical school. Romantic struggles, also, I think that can often be way too personal. So, again, it would depend on the specific situation, but in general, I don't recommend it. I haven't ever really seen a personal statement that effectively included a description of romantic struggles that stayed on the topic of medicine. Have you ever seen one about that, Linda?
No, but I can remember. I can think of other, not specifically in medical personal statements. Actually, one I can think of. It was actually a case of abuse. I've seen them where clients tried in other professional settings, and the trouble with talking about breakups specifically is that they're so common. It's not going to distinguish you from anybody.
Yeah.
It happened to almost everybody. So unless, you're one of those few people who basically falls in love with your high school sweetheart, never dates anybody else, and gets married, you're probably going to have a breakup at some point in time. And in that case, and again, I don't think it's a very effective way to distinguish yourself or necessarily show fit with medicine.
Also, I mean, focusing too much on yourself, right? You can run the risk of seeming, and we're all becoming narcissists because of technology and our culture, etc. But you can run the risk of perhaps sounding too narcissistic or too self-involved. I think a lot of the best personal statements focus on how students have helped other people.
Yeah.
So I think going into too much detail about your personal relationships, romantic or family, can be dangerous unless there's a direct connection to why you're applying to medical school. But these are very
or the
questions.
aspects of your character that will make you a good physician. That would be the other element. But I think we should move forward. We should move on.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, and we'll have time for more questions later. So I found in approaching the personal statement, it's most useful to use an outline. So whenever, right, you're putting together an essay or any kind of important writing, right, using outlines can help you strategize and come up with a strategy that's going to effectively work for you and meet your goals. So taking the time to put together a really fantastic outline saves you a lot of trouble of editing and rewriting later. Editing for tone is something important to do, right? Stating the facts. So you don't want your personal statement to be too melodramatic. If you worry about making each event in your life sound very exciting to keep the reader's attention, right, you run the risk of making it sound like a Bollywood movie. So careful to edit for tone to make sure it's not bitter, it's not melodramatic, right? You don't want to overdo it. So state the facts. Taking a break, and the fact that you're all starting early, I'm so proud of each and every one of you. So you'll be able to give yourself time. So taking a break and reviewing your personal statement draft by draft. Right, if you wait to the last minute to write it, it's going to be very hard to do that. Making sure that you end on a high note. So focusing on your progress. That is something, right, rather than ending with a critique or any kind of bitterness, focusing on gratitude or, explaining how far you've come in your life, focusing on the progress can be very helpful. In my experience, the best personal statements are authentic and honest depictions of real motivations in how you've overcome challenges. And this is often a focus on subtleties, right? So looking at the details in your own life, and this is where your personal statement will be unique, right? No one else is ever going to have the same combination of experiences or events that you have. So if you focus on these subtleties, right, you will not sound like anybody else. And that's the goal that I set for my clients, is I want them to be proud to submit their personal statements, that they feel it's an accurate reflection of their personality and themselves. And it won't sound like anybody else. Your own personal statement can be a masterpiece, right? A culmination of your experiences and emotional maturation that highlight your perseverance against all obstacles. So one of the most important characteristics they look for in personal statements is resilience. So resilience is one of the best predictors of whether a student will finish their medical education. And actually, I'm writing a thesis currently on the medical school interview. Linda, could you guess which characteristics? So in interviews, they actually look for two characteristics. These two characteristics indicate that a student is most likely to graduate from medical school with honors. What two characteristics would you guess those would be?
Well, I guess one is resilience. And I'm going
to...
Perseverance, okay. The other one I would guess would be compassion, but I'm not sure that's as closely tied to completing medical school as being a good physician.
Well, I was surprised by it. I would think it would be a soft skill like that too, people related. It's perseverance, right? It's almost a synonym for resilience. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Perseverance and confidence.
Actually, Malik, you nailed it. One of the participants suggested confidence. Somebody else said grit.
And who was that?
Malik, confidence.
Malik, that's excellent, Malik. Good for you. Yeah, so perseverance and confidence are two characteristics that predict whether students will graduate from medical school with honors. So, of course, that would be important to demonstrate in your interview, obviously, but how wonderful would it be for you guys to demonstrate that in your essays? So before you even get to the interview, right, making sure that you highlight those experiences or the ways that you can show, right, your resilience or perseverance and demonstrate confidence, right, by your progress and improvement. Yeah, that's right. I'm impressed, Malik. Okay, so the best personal statements that I've ever read, in 12 years I've read lots and lots of personal statements, probably in the thousands almost now. The best personal statements address any questions that the selection committee may have about you as a student. So this is the place, right, where you get to address any weaknesses, right, address any questions that the selection committee will have about you as a student. So you get to be strategic in these essays. So are there any questions that you have about the personal statement before we move on?
Okay, there are a few questions here. And I suggest that we're running a little behind, so I'm going to only take one or two now, and then we'll come back to it at the end, okay?
Sure.
Jasmine asks, if I've been through medical issues myself, could I mention the impact it has on my wanting to pursue a career in medicine?
Yeah, that depends. So you have to be very careful with that because you don't want to give a personal medical history. Also, you don't want to reveal something that may actually end up being a red flag where they question your ability or your health, right, the quality of your health, whether you'll even be able to complete medical school. If it's a very serious condition, it may raise red flags. The other thing is that it may come across as a little too self-involved. If your introduction is all about your own health struggles, right, that I don't find would be as impressive as somebody who demonstrates through their activities or commitment to others how they're able to help others, right? So
what if Alicia, somebody started out with their own health situation and then recovered from whatever it was, and then explored medicine through academic classes and through activities and volunteering and that kind of stuff?
So there's one example that comes to mind of a student who did that, but she didn't get accepted. She had childhood leukemia, and she wrote about, this was many years ago, and this is why I don't recommend this approach, she wrote about the experience of having leukemia as a child and the treatments that she went through, and it did have an impact on her memory because she was so young when she was exposed to those
radiation.
Yeah, the treatment was so harsh. And so it ended up sort of actually not helping her because people were, some of the faculty members were concerned. I remember that selection committee meeting actually. Some of the faculty members were concerned about her ability to retain information and to apply it in a clinical setting if it was a significant enough impairment. So that's right, a situation where it seems like it would be a great thing to be able to say that she was a cancer survivor and it was empowering, but at the same time it did, I do remember the faculty members having a really intense conversation about her fitness, to provide care.
Okay.
So you have to be very careful. Yeah, I haven't seen, have you seen a good example of one of those, Linda? I can't say in the introduction, I haven't seen one where someone's covered a personal health issue.
I think I have seen where they were in an accident and were inspired by the care they received. They recovered, and then they again went to explore medicine from the caregiver side as opposed to the care recipient side. So the health crisis, whatever it was, again, it inspired their exploration.
Okay.
And then they went on from a passive role to an active role.
That would make sense to me. If it's a one-time event, they fully 100% recovered, and then it led to their action to help others. That makes sense that would work. Because, as you said, it went from passive to active. But I think you'd have to have some kind, right, of active role for that to be effective.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, I don't mean to be pushing you, because I think the questions we're getting are excellent, and of course your insights are outstanding. But let's keep it going. Okay.
Okay. Activity section. So we're going to talk about the activity section next. So my advice is to not reinvent the wheel, but to start with your resume or CV. So updating your resume or CV can be one of the best ways, right, to approach the activities section, to have a complete list of everything that you've done, and hopefully you're updating that as you move along through your education. So keep updating your resume CV now, right, since you guys have time. So it can be a time-consuming task to fill out the activity section. So don't try to do it all at once. Break it down into sections. So completing 5 activity descriptions per day can be a good goal. And this will help you ultimately to increase your stamina in preparation for your secondary applications, because people are always overwhelmed by the number of secondaries they receive and how many essays they need to write in a very short amount of time. So why do you think the activity section is so important when applying with low numbers? So for those of you listening, why do you think the activity section is so important, especially when you're applying with low numbers?
Shows versatility, says Vincent, because they want to know what you are passionate about, and it can probably explain your low numbers. It's possible, or at least give context for low numbers. Shows that you are well-rounded, says Stephanie, because your activities determine who you are. They probably reflect who you are. That's my comment. Anybody else? Could show that you are very hands-on. If you're too active, can that be detrimental to your chances of getting into medical school if your GPA and MCAT are low? That's a question from Kariba. Shows that you have been engaging in extracurricular activities, shows commitment to medicine, reframes you out of just grades and numbers. This is from Shlomo. So what do you think, Alicia?
Nice. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
You're all absolutely correct. So activities, right, help you illustrate the skills, right, that aren't captured by the GPA or the MCAT. So for the activity section, right, include the details, right, of how committed, if this applies to you, include the details of how committed you were to working in the community. So many students overcommit themselves through their community service, and it's important to highlight the strength in your application, right? So being overcommitted or neglecting your GPA, especially if you only did it for a short period of time, hopefully, right, can demonstrate how wonderful of a doctor you're going to be, how you're going to step in and take on that level of responsibility to focus on serving your community. So for those of you listening, can you give me examples of what activities you will include in your application?
Shadowing, being on a soccer team, research, volunteering. Can you be more specific about how you volunteered? Teaching, says Andrew. Working as a CNA. Respite care, says Shlomo. Being on the board of a club, Rianda. Volunteer, EMT. Worked at a clinic as a case manager. That's good. Crew team. That's a different one. Coaching, peer mentorship, pre-med club. Working as an EMT, clinical experience, volunteer tutor TA, president of a pre-health group, medical scribe, let's see, hotline counselor, leadership positions, let's be a little more specific, scribing, that's excellent. That's a pretty good cross-section of activities.
Yeah, these are fantastic. Crew team, excellent, shows balance and teamwork, especially with crew. Pre-med club, excellent, shows right that you like to collaborate, to network, and medicine's all about societies and clubs, right, and staying up to date as a group, especially within various specialties. Volunteer tutor, fantastic. Tutoring shows leadership. And also it helps you to learn the concepts better to teach them yourself, fantastic. MedScribe, excellent. Hotline counselor, that also sounds fantastic. That's leadership as well. These are all really, really, really great activities. So I want you guys for a moment to step into the shoes of an admissions professional. So if you guys imagine for a moment that you're evaluating applications at a medical school. So if you are in their shoes, what would you look for in the application of someone with numbers that might be lower than their average?
Andrew says upward trend. Anthony, medical experience. Someone who's really excited in their extracurriculars, passion and commitment to medicine, says Alexandra. Commitment to service, says Nurtia. Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names. Publication, says Kathleen. Tenacity, commitment, compassion, says Perline. Post-bac, says Stephanie. Well-rounded applicant, hands-on applicant. Activities that show their commitment to medicine and personal growth. The length of activity that you were involved in your activities. Explanation for why the grades are low in your personal statement, suggests Nancy. And Leslie writes, I would want to see some evidence that they tried to address areas of weakness. Maybe some non-med related things, says Madonna. Commitment to service and clinical experience, says Janelle. Alicia, what do you say?
Yeah, definitely. Upward trend, someone mentioned upward trend. Somebody else said post-bac. Yes, so making sure that you highlight if you have an increasing trend in your GPA, whether that's during undergrad or through completing post-bac coursework. More and more medical schools are accepting students who've done post-bac coursework. It's an interesting trend. So being a non-traditional student, will actually help you. Somebody else mentioned commitment to service. Yes, absolutely. Tenacity, somebody said. Yes. And then again, somebody mentioned explaining why the grades are low. And this is an excellent thing to talk about, right? This is your opportunity, right, to demonstrate, right, how you spent your time. And actions always speak louder than words. So if you were busy translating at a free clinic, educating people about cancer or other health issues, and that you were committed to these activities, right, and you spend a lot of time doing them to the point of hurting your own grades, that shows a lot of selflessness. So while you want to make sure that you only apply with an increasing trend in your GPA, if there are any dips in your GPA or MCAT scores, this is, right, a great way to explain those dips. And somebody else said addressing areas of weakness. So yeah, this is the place to do that, right? To make sure that, right, you're showing rather than telling why you're going to be a great doctor through your activities, through the experiences that you've chosen. Yeah, I agree. These are all really fantastic. So moving on, so we're going to talk about the most meaningful essays. So for those of you listening, what is the difference between the activity descriptions and these essays?
Anybody know? A lot of characters. Like typographical characters. Okay, Andy's essay is 1,300 characters. Description is 700 characters.
Yes.
Activities are more of a list. You can go beyond the facts, Shlomo says, in terms of the most meaningful essays. Essays explain what you learned from the experiences, says Andrew. Most meaningful essays have more depth, gives you more of a voice. Alicia?
Yeah, the first person's absolutely correct. Character limit 700 for each description versus 1,325 characters for the most meaningful essays. And keep in mind, somebody said that's a lot of characters. It's actually not. It's just a paragraph, really. If you think about it, really, it's just a paragraph. The total number required is also different, so there's 15 activity descriptions versus only 3 most meaningful essays. So it's not too much more writing if you think about it. So for the most meaningful essays, you'll need to come up with more detail. So as somebody said, you'll have space to go into explaining why it was so meaningful. So going outside and beyond just the basic facts of what your responsibilities were, what the experience was. So it can help to brainstorm to come up with more ideas for those essays. So journaling, taking time to reflect for why those experiences were so meaningful. Because you guys are starting early, I highly recommend that you keep a journal as you're doing these activities. Write about your reflections, about these experiences. If you're volunteering, tutoring, write about them, because you can use all of that material, that you generate now for your personal statements, your activity descriptions, and your secondary essays later. So you're going to be helping yourself out big time. Future you is going to be very happy. Are there any other ways that you guys plan on coming up with ideas for these additional essays?
Randa asks if blogging about your experience is a good idea. I think only if it helps you prepare you for writing about it in the application from an application perspective. Picking one clinical, one leadership, one non-medical, I guess, for the most meaningful essays. What do you think about that, Alicia? One clinical, one leadership, one non-medical.
One clinical, one
leadership,
and one
non-medical.
Well, I'm going to go back first to the blogging comment. My only hesitation, if you're blogging about your experiences, what you're experiencing, the problem is that that's public. So it would be very easy if somebody ran a Google search on your name and saw that years ago you wrote about all this stuff and it's verbatim the same in your application. It'd be very easy to look it up if it's just a general public blog. Also, you run the risk of people plagiarizing and using those ideas, especially if you have some good ideas there. So I don't know, blogging. How do you feel about blogging, Linda?
I mean, I think it's one way to get you writing, but I think Alicia's raising a good point about taking something verbatim from your blog and putting it in your application. I think that could be problematic. But in terms of getting you used to writing, it's like journaling or any other writing exercise. It probably will improve your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great if you could keep it private, so it's for your reference. But yeah, I mean, you also run the risk of people plagiarizing if you've got some good ideas. Yeah, so I'd be careful with that. But if you were going to use it as a source to then rewrite your essays, I think that'd be safe if it wasn't verbatim. Okay, so the other question was the distribution of how to select which 3 most meaningful essays. So one clinical, one leadership, one non-clinical.
So, wouldn't that really depend on the individual? I mean,
it does, yeah. Thinking about, I do recommend to a lot of students that you do choose, if research is really important to you, have one research and then one, clinical, obviously. I tend to the recommendation I give to students is one, thing that's secretly academic, so whether that's research or some other project or activity that you've done, one clinical experience, and one community service experience. I think that's a better distribution. And it could be a leadership community service experience. You could combine 2 of those. That would actually be very effective. But I think ultimately it has to be things that were meaningful to you, that you have something valuable to say, rather than just choosing a distribution that you think is what they want to hear. So that it is going to be individual to a big degree. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to talk about the statement of disadvantage. So this is often a challenging section to complete, but it will only help explain why you may have struggled academically or why you were not able to focus on studying only on the MCAT, right, if you could not afford a test prep program, or if you weren't able to take time off of work to study, if you had to support yourself or your family. So will anyone be completing this section? Could you give us a show of hands? Will anybody be completing the statement of disadvantage?
Oh, hands are coming up. About 20%.
Okay, interesting. Excellent. Yeah, so it's only going to help you, right, to apply as a disadvantaged applicant. Would anyone like examples of each of the 3 different types of disadvantage?
Are you gonna define disadvantage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's 3 different kinds of disadvantage. So there's social, economic, and educational disadvantage. In the past, MCAS encouraged students to apply as disadvantaged if they experienced any form of these 3 types of disadvantage. But most recently, they prefer to see students apply who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So if you only have educational disadvantage, I don't recommend applying as disadvantaged. And I'll give you an example of each one. So social disadvantage would be if you grew up in a single-parent household, if you were treated differently due to race, ethnicity, religion, language, sexuality, if you weren't given the same opportunities as other people for any of those reasons. Economic disadvantage would be if your family relied on food stamps, if you lived in Section 8 housing, if your family struggled to meet your basic needs or lived below the poverty limits, and that information is available online. Educational disadvantage would be if you attended low-performing public schools or if you have a learning disability. But again, in recent years, MCAS is preferring for students to apply who have mostly socioeconomic disadvantage. And they have an extra section that appears that has you reveal your family's income levels, parents' level of education, right, as well as this essay will pop up. So the strategies I recommend for completing this section include stating the facts, right, so just stating the facts as they are. So no need to complain or to, share negative stories about racism or, of course, institutional racism exists, unfortunately, but it won't help for you to share, right, those negative stories or experiences. But putting a positive spin, right, on how you've overcome those obstacles, right, is what will inspire and make people want to invite you to interview. Also, the second strategy I recommend is not replicating anything from the personal statement. So no cutting and pasting word for word, verbatim, from the personal statement to the statement of disadvantage. They should be 2 completely separate essays. There will be some overlap, right, because it's your life story, so that's not going to change. But you don't want to cut and paste, nothing verbatim. Any questions about statement of disadvantage before we move on?
Let's see. Okay, Alan asks, if we qualified for MCAS, the fee assistance program, and were accepted, is that necessarily disadvantaged?
Good question. So the fee assistance program, and they're now accepting applications. They decide whether they will give you the FAP based on your FAFSA. And the FAFSA includes, right, your family income level, right, all the financial information and background that they need to decide whether they'll give you the FAP. So they do decide based on your family income, just the basic numbers that you provide on the FAFSA. That's how they decide whether to give the FAP. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So now we're going to talk about school selection. So moving on. So school selection can really make the difference between an acceptance and a rejection. This section, when you're applying with low numbers, can make all the difference, right? You can maximize your chances of getting an acceptance by applying to the right schools. So for those of you who have applied in the past, how many schools did you apply to?
Anybody want to put it in the question window? How many schools did you apply to previously, if you applied previously? 10, says Whitney. 17, says Alexis. 18, 20.
Nice. Okay, great.
29. 29.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a full range there from 10 to
Yeah.
29. So I recommend applying anywhere from 20 to 25 schools. 29 begins to sound like a lot. I'm imagining that person had quite a lot of secondaries. So you have to kind of decide, right, realistically, how many secondary essays are you going to be able to return quickly within a 2-week turnaround time. So 20 to 25 schools seems to be a very safe number in my experience. So if applicable, right, you can apply for the fee assistance program, as somebody mentioned. You apply for FAP on the AMCAS website. If you do get the FAP, you get half price for the MCAT if you haven't taken it, so a reduced fee for the MCAT. You get to apply to 15 schools for free, and they waive the secondary application fees. So you save thousands of dollars if you apply for FAP and receive it. And they're now accepting applications. So when you're deciding on school selection, evaluate your statistics. I think a lot of people have trouble with this, right? A lot of students want to beat themselves up about their numbers. And it's not about making yourself feel bad or good. It's about just sitting down and looking at the numbers without judgment and comparing those numbers to the medical schools you would like to attend, right? I think it's safe, right, as long as one of your numbers firmly fits in the averages that the school has, it's okay for you to apply, right? If your MCAT score is firmly within the averages, right, and your GPA is just perhaps slightly out of the average, right, you could consider applying there. So as long as one of your numbers fits within the average, right, you can consider applying to that school. But other things to look at are things like if you're an out-of-state resident, what percent of out-of-state residents did that school accept? If it's below 30%, probably not worth your time to apply there. So we're going to recommend, so based on the statistics available on the AMCAS and the ACOMAS websites, I'm going to share the average numbers that have been for all applicants as well as matriculants for allopathic and osteopathic medical schools, because this is the best way for you guys to get an idea, right, if you haven't yet graduated, for where you want your scores to be. So for allopathic medical school, and this is true for AMCAS, for all applicants applying, the average MCAT score was a 501.8, right? So as long as you break a 500, right, that you'll be in the average of all applicants. The average cumulative GPA was a 3.55 for all applicants, and the average science GPA was a 3.45. For applicants who were accepted, matriculants, the average MCAT score was a 508.7, right? So obviously higher. The average cumulative GPA was a 3.7, and the average science GPA was a 3.64. So these numbers just give you an idea, right, of whether, right, either you should apply this cycle or improve one or both of those scores. But keep in mind, right, the medical schools, they're self-reporting these numbers, and they're, right, providing an average. So they're not providing the range of scores accepted. You guys would be so shocked if I shared, examples of scores that I've seen students get accepted with. But that's not to say, right, that it's a good idea to apply with both a low MCAT and a low GPA. Usually if you apply with a lower GPA, you should have, right, a higher MCAT score and vice versa. So you want to be strategic. So for osteopathic medical school ACOMAS, these numbers are slightly lower. So if your GPA or MCAT or both are in the lower range, you might want to consider only applying to osteopathic medical schools. So for all applicants applying to DO schools, osteopathic medical schools, the average MCAT score was a 499.32. The average cumulative GPA was a 3.45, and the average science GPA was a 3.33. So for students who applied and were accepted, matriculants, right, they earned an average MCAT of 502.17 and an average cumulative GPA of a 3.54. and an average science GPA of a 3.45. So obviously, right, these numbers are lower than those accepted for allopathic medical school. So, right, this is a good indication of which school system you should apply to if you fall within these ranges. I also recommend that you attend pre-med conferences to network with other students, medical students, and medical school outreach officers. And honestly, to set yourself up for success now, visit medical school campuses now when you have the time, especially all the med schools in your state. You're much more likely to get accepted into a medical school in which you are considered a resident of the state. Research schools that specialize in your research interests or fields of interest. And next we're going to talk about the timeline. And really, because medical school admissions is done on a rolling basis, a rolling admissions basis, applying early is critical, especially when you're applying with lower numbers. If you apply late in the cycle, they may not even read your application if they've already sent all the offers to interview that they have available. So when you apply late in the cycle, you run the risk of a person not even looking at your application. So are there any other questions that you guys have?
There are other questions. There are actually a lot of other questions. But I think we should conclude and then come back because we're past 6 o'clock on my time. We're past over an hour. Okay?
Sure.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
So how many people found this presentation useful? If you could give me a show of hands.
Oh, the hands are flying up. Whoa.
Yay! Great. And now, yeah, we have time for questions.
Well, why don't I was going to do my thing, and then we're going to go back to the questions.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Go for it. Sorry.
All right. So thank you very much for your attention to Alicia's presentation. I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll go back to the Q&A, and I've been marking several of your questions here. All right. Alicia will take more of your questions in just a couple of minutes. I want to take a minute to share some of my thoughts on the med school process and Alicia's outstanding presentation because she does a great job every single time. Alicia's given you the what of applying to medical school with low stats, but not the how. Not the how because it's impossible for her to give with any depth and any specificity in a webinar for the many. She has to be general, and we at Accepted have to be general in terms of the advice that we post on our blog and our webinars on our podcast because we're talking to the many. But you are an individual applying to medical school. Each of you has unique talents and perhaps a weakness or two. You don't want to let a mistake or a blemish prevent you from pursuing the career of your dreams. Your goal, apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. Now, the medical school application process is grueling and the stakes are high. AAMC last year processed 830,016 applications from 50,042 applicants. 21,030 matriculated. That's an acceptance rate of just over 40% in the entire applicant pool. The ACOMAS numbers are similar. 185,602 applications from 20,720 applicants with 6,778 matriculants. That's just under a 33% matriculation rate. Given the complexity of the application process and the high stakes, not to mention the low acceptance rates, you need an expert guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. We provide you, as you see on the screen, with a customized approach that fits your needs. We're not one size fits all. We have lots of options so that if you only need a little bit of help with one element of the application, that's what you can get. If you are starting from scratch and want comprehensive assistance, that's what you can get. You will also, with Accepted, you'll have one dedicated advisor who becomes an expert in your story, and that expertise complements his or her expertise in the medical school admissions process, and they can help you present your story. Plus, you get the candor of an objectivity of an experienced professional mentor with decades of experience in medical school admissions. Now, Alicia, you've heard her presentation for this hour that we've been together. She's outstanding, and she can advise and mentor you as you choose where to apply, how to mitigate those weaknesses, how to highlight your strengths, how to show fit, demonstrate that you'll be a contributor, and ultimately gain acceptance. And she's fantastic. If you want to work with Alicia, sign up soon. She's available now. But I know she's going to book up. So you may want to know a little bit about some of our other outstanding consultants, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But you might, if you're starting now and you want comprehensive assistance, you should consider our primary application packages, and you can see we have a variety of options there. Here's what I'd like to see you do now. I'd like you to go to accept.com/primary, which will take you to this page here and show you the comprehensive options that we offer. Then choose the service that's right for you, get the guidance you need, and apply confidently and effectively. Some of you may say, isn't accepted expensive? Well, unfortunately, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with Accepted's help. Well, the cost of reapplication can easily be several $1,000s. A year of earnings at a much lower level than your post-MD or post-DO degree, that's also a cost. And the potential that you could have gotten into a quote-unquote better program with greater lifetime opportunities and earnings, that's also a potential cost of not using Accepted. Every year we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected that they wanted to work with us the second time around. They would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. While we do not have an independent survey of our clients, our own data shows that our clients enjoy an 80% acceptance rate to MD and DO programs. And if you remember a minute ago, I talked about just under 40% for MD and just right around 33% for DO programs overall. Estimates in the MBA market are that 40% or to 50% of students in top MBA programs use admissions consultants. I don't know what the numbers are in medical school. I couldn't find anything, but that's give you some sense of the growth of the MBA, of the admissions consulting industry. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? And again, here's where you're going to hear about several different consultants. Again, if you want to work with Alicia, she's available now, but she's not going to be available for too much longer. Here's feedback on her. I was offered 4 interviews total and was accepted to 2 schools. I'm eternally grateful to you, Alicia, for all the critical advice and help you gave. I could not have made it through the application process without your help. Thank you for your patience and for truly caring about my success. You can see feedback on Cheryl Newman's, Dr. Cheryl Newman's assistance in the right-hand comment. And here are a couple of more. From one of Sid's clients, hello Sydney, wow, I'm so impressed, you're a genius. I cannot believe how well you managed to cut my essay in half without compromising my tone or eliminating little stories. Thank you. I could not have done it without you. There are 17 more hours left till the application is due, and I am not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side with this essay. Or for Dr. Herman Gordon, Herman is all around brilliant. He is receptive, considerate, and very talented at editing on both a macro and micro level. His ideas and input transformed my essays. I have no doubt that his help has made a huge difference in the quality of my applications. I would recommend Herman to anyone and everyone. So once again, this is what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's webinar. Visit www.accept.com/primary. Choose the service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need. Apply confidently and effectively. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that I would provide a special offer. Here it is, $250 off any primary package with coupon code PRIMARY250. So again, Alicia gave you the what of applying successfully, even if you have low stats. Let us help you individually with the how. We're putting our money where our mouth is and by giving you this discount. And we look forward to working with you. You have until February 13th. That's when the discount will end. In the meantime, for some questions, okay? Now, you've been asking a lot. Okay, This is a really good question. Here we go. Got a lot of questions here. Alexis asks, should you completely redo your essays if you had applied the previous year?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so that's easy. All right. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's one click for them to pull up your previous application, and it would absolutely hurt you to not rewrite those essays because hopefully you're going to have a lot of new things to say.
Right. When is the apply early period? June?
Okay, so here's my personal philosophy on the application process. So it's like the Army, right? You don't want to be in the first wave of soldiers to apply. So I don't recommend applying the first or second week of June when the application first opens for a COMAS. And this is because the psychology, and I remember I used to do this, the psychology of the application reviewers is that they're going to be hardest on the first wave of applications. So it's safest, in my opinion, to apply the second, third weeks of June. July's perfectly fine to apply. August becomes late. September is super late. October is the first deadline of most of the medical schools. UC Davis used to have the very first deadline, and it was October 1st. So October is just, you missed the boat, yeah.
All right. Somebody asked, how can we sign up with Alicia? How can you request Alicia? It's very easy. There's a comments box in the shopping cart. Just request Alicia. Okay? That's another easy question. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's get another question here. Okay. Somebody asked, what's the lowest MCAT that you have seen a student get accepted with?
Okay, this is a dangerous question. The lowest MCAT I've ever seen accepted was a 19, but. That
was Joe, right?
No, actually. It was
really?
allopathic. I'm not going to say which medical school.
Okay.
But he lived out of his car during college because he couldn't afford to pay rent. Extremely disadvantaged background, single-parent households. Their family couldn't afford to pay for keep the lights on in their house. Sometimes they had to use the car headlights. They'd open the door to the garage and eat dinner by using the car headlights because their family, was struggling that much. I mean, you cried when you read his personal statement.
Okay.
This person's now an amazing doctor, so I don't recommend applying with MCAT scores, lower than the 500 range, unless you're applying to DO and it's very close to 500.
Okay, let's see that. This thing's moving. Vincent asks, wait, this thing moved again. What if you can't identify any major struggles? Do you have to have a struggle? I'm asking this. Do you have to have a struggle in your personal statement?
That's such an interesting question. So, they're really looking to see resilience. Many years ago, I want to say like 7 years ago when I was at UC Davis School of Medicine, we actually had a medical student who had a near-perfect, when he applied, he had a near-perfect GPA, near-perfect MCAT score. On his application, he had no other activities outside of school, but his grades were all amazing. We ended up having to 5150 him. For the first time in his life, he started to struggle in his first year of medical school, and he lost it. He started threatening the other students, threatening staff members, and he had to be 50'd and put on psych evaluation.
Oh my goodness.
So students who've never struggled before, we've, over time, right, medical schools have identified those people as being major risks. So if you've never struggled in your life, and often a common interview question is, how do you handle stress? Or describe a time when you failed, right? So it's all psychological profiling in a sense that they want to see that you have developed resilience. So in my opinion, currently writing a thesis on the medical school interview, I would say it would be a little bit risky not to demonstrate how you overcome challenges.
I mean, there are people probably who have never struggled or never failed, but there are pretty few of them. I recently read an
Yeah.
article. I recently read an
Yeah.
article that at Northwestern's engineering program, they deliberately give freshman students problems that are essentially unsolvable,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, I believe.
they haven't had that experience, and they want them to have that experience. And in the worst case, they'll solve that problem too, and humanity will be better off. But it was a very interesting article, just for this reason. I also think, though, that I think if you think in terms of challenges as opposed to struggles, most of us have challenges. Most of us have ha- do have something that's thrown us for a loop at some point in our life. Um, that you don't have. Years ago, I would give presentations. This was like in the late 90s, and some of my clients had escaped from Iran, or their families had in the 80s, and they like gone across the desert on camelback. They'd had horrible experiences, and I said, well, what if you haven't done that kind of thing? It made for a very dramatic opening to an essay, but what if you haven't had that kind of experience? I would say, well, first of all, be very thankful that you haven't gone through that. But that doesn't mean that you haven't struggled or you haven't faced challenge. So think
I
about
think it's hard I think it's hard to figure that out for yourself. That's why I think it's so helpful to work with someone like me or my colleagues at Accepted, because we can help you identify situations that you may not think were challenging,
yeah.
but to most people would definitely be considered challenging. My mentor is a psychiatrist who teaches psychiatry at UCSF, and I write blogs for her nonprofit. The website's equilibriumdynamics.org. But almost everyone, I don't think I've ever come across a student who hasn't experienced some kind of challenge in their life. But it can be hard to identify that for yourself.
Right. Challenges are kind of part of life, and I agree with you. Sometimes the difficulty is in identifying them. Okay.
Yeah.
Autumn has a
Yeah.
really interesting question. Can you provide some tips on expressing confidence, since that's a critical quality, in writing without seeming overly confident or arrogant? And arrogant is my word, not Autumn's.
Yeah, so confidence is super, super important in an interview situation, right? But how do you demonstrate confidence in your essays? So I think definitely it's the language that you use, right? If there, depends on the tone that you use. There's a lot of ways to show confidence. Confidence, right, is closely related, I think, to competence, right? When you're good at what you do, there's an automatic level of confidence that comes with that, right? And it's a fine line between arrogance, right? When you're really good at what you do, some people cross over that line to arrogance, and you, of course, never want to hopefully ever come across that way in your life, but especially not in your application essays. So an easy way to, I think, demonstrate confidence is by showing your competence.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So how effective you are at helping people, right? How much you care, right? And how you're able to create positive outcomes from difficult or challenging situations.
100%.
And other people in your own, right? So becoming a hospice volunteer is a wonderful thing to do, right? In being able to support people through right, a difficult phase or transition in their life. So that's one way where it might not be your own struggle, but helping or supporting someone through their struggle would show a lot of right, competence if you're able to create positive outcomes and to help them get through that time successfully.
Right. I think that competence does show confidence. The ability to assume responsibility shows confidence and can be portrayed without sounding arrogant or bragging at all. Saying what you've done as opposed to claiming the ability to do things is a big difference. Or if you say, I can do X, Y, Z because I've done ABC, again, that is confidence because you've already done that kind of thing. Getting back to the question of challenges and overcoming challenges, again, don't think of it, or struggles, don't think of it in really narrow terms. And my daughter has been volunteering for an organization for years that assists children struggling with life-threatening illnesses. And this was when she was fairly young. I think she was maybe 18, 19, 20. She became quite close with a child who was initially doing very well and then had a relapse. And my daughter kept visiting the little girl as she deteriorated. And then one day, it happened to be the weekend that my son got engaged. We heard that the little girl had passed away, and
Oh,
my daughter was absolutely heartbroken, and
oh,
and definitely grieving and mourning. And at the same time, she has since done so. She went into a field where she professionally is working with sick children. And somebody asked her, a mentor of hers asked her, what do you, I mean, do you still want to go forward in your plans? And how has this experience kind of affected you? And she just said, look, yes, I miss her. It was really hard, but I know that I brought her some joy, and that was worth it. So, there
oh,
was,
wonderful.
yeah. So I think that is an example, despite a middle class upbringing, of a struggle and a challenge that she has overcome many times at this point, and you know, can be the kind of thing that you folks can use. Obviously, you'll have to come up with your own example, but it was something she overcame and inspired her to. It did not stop her from going down the path she was already pursuing. So
That's
I hope.
wonderful. That's a beautiful example, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you
All
for
right.
sharing that.
We have a couple more questions here. If you have a very high GPA from community college, but a low GPA higher than 2.8 from a four-year one, would that help? I assume he means as a community college GPA help.
Well, if that was in the first part of college for you and you have, it sounds like a decreasing trend,
Yeah.
um, in that case, I'd recommend post-bac coursework. So I've written and published the only book ever written on pre-medical post-bac programs and alternate pathways to medical school. It's available on Amazon. So if you do have a decreasing trend in your GPA, and you might want to take a moment to check this, then it's possible that post-bac coursework would be the best way for you to address that by creating an increasing trend. So definitely check out the book. And it also has success stories of students who have created that increasing trend. So there's 7 inspirational stories, and there's examples of personal statements that I've assisted students with outlining and editing. So there are definitely some inspirational examples if you need some guidance there.
Right. I'm gonna chat what I think is the title, The Definitive Guide to Post-Baccalaureate Pre-Medical Programs. Okay, and
Yes,
obviously it's by Alicia, so you can get it
good.
on Amazon. Okay, and I just chatted it all to you. Okay,
It's a bright, yeah.
it's an excellent book. Okay, and Daphne asks, what if you already completed grad school to improve your GPA, but they're still looking at your undergrad cumulative GPA?
Yeah, so the thing with that is that everybody has an undergraduate GPA to compare.
Yeah.
So med schools aren't that excited about graduate GPAs, right, because not everyone has one. The second thing is that most graduate GPAs are inflated, right? They're almost always higher than undergraduate GPAs, so there's significant inflation. So it's a less reliable number. And also, if you do, for example, have a decreasing trend in your GPA, having a 4.0 graduate GPA isn't going to calculate into that cumulative undergraduate GPA. On the MCAT application, the undergraduate and graduate GPAs are completely separate. So a graduate GPA is going to have no impact on your undergraduate cumulative GPA. The best way to improve that number is to do post-baccalaureate coursework.
Okay. All right. Leslie's asking about 2 MCAT scores. For example, a 24 and a 32, or a 499 to a 511. Let's assume that the 24 is the first one.
Congratulations, that's improvement.
Yes.
So if the scores are chronological, the lower one was the first and the higher one is the second, that shows improvement, and it will not hurt you if you're applying with a score that was lower but that you've then improved. That's a great way to show resilience, that you weren't happy with the score, so you retook the exam and got a higher score. That's fantastic. That's evidence of resilience.
Absolutely. Okay.
So congrats.
Let's see. And Jay asks, if you are reapplying, should the same schools be repeated if you did not get an interview the first time?
So, can you repeat that question again?
If you are reapplying, should the same schools be repeated if you did not get an interview the first time?
So the question is, should you apply to the same schools again if you did get an interview the first time you applied to them?
Right.
Got it. Okay. So in that case, it depends. I mean, when I work with students, of course, I love every part of the application process. It's a lot of fun, the strategy. But I would want to look at what schools you applied to and why, and to look more closely at were there any reach schools or too many reach schools? You'd want to look and see, were those strategic schools for you to apply to in the first place, and if not, what would be better schools for you to apply to. And because for 6 years, I worked as director of the UC Davis School of Medicine postdoc program, I worked exclusively with students who were applying with low scores. And by the time I left the program, 100% of students that I worked with were getting acceptances to medical schools across the country. And I had the highest acceptance rates for any program like it in the state of California. So I know, right, which medical schools are more likely to accept students with lower scores. So I'd be very happy to go over that list with you.
Okay. I think we've gone over a lot, and I think we haven't answered everybody's questions, but we've answered a lot of questions. If you have additional questions that you want answered, you can post them. Let me get that URL again. At accepted.com. Wait, that's not the right URL. Accepted.com. Where is it? Not finding it now. Oh well. I think it was, you can accepted.com. Well, it wouldn't be accepted.com/primary. That's where you can purchase. I think it's accepted 2018. Or you can just post it to any med school post on the blog. That'll do it. Wait. Here, I'm going to get it. Nope. So, it's accepted.com/medschool2018. Sorry about that. And I want to thank you very much for your time, your attention, your participation, your questions, your answers. Big thank you to Alicia. Anybody want to join me with that? Please feel free to add your thoughts and your thanks.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating. I wish you all success.
And with that, I want to wish you, again, best of luck in the application process. The thanks are coming in. And yes, yeah, definitely coming in. You're very welcome. Thank you again so much. And one more time, you can save $250 off any primary package with primary $250, and this special ends February 13th. Good luck, everybody. Have a very good evening.